This is a post-event recording of a paper delivered by Nia Thundapani, Gregor Wittrick, and me to the 2025 ICDHS conference in Delhi, India. On the 12th of June 2008, an illuminated library table from Chandigarh, India was sold at a Phillips design auction for $301,000, almost doubling the piece's pre-sale estimate of $150,000 to $180,000. One of two pieces of Chandigarh's modernist furniture in this auction, the library table was successfully sold without any public indication of its provenance, authenticity, or history. To many, including us, this is an almost inconceivable occurrence. A piece of municipal furniture used by generations of Punjab University students sold at a prestigious international auction house for more than the value of a house. This auction was, however, not an isolated incident, but rather the apex of a continued trend of astronomical sale prices for modernist furniture from Chandigarh. From these objects' humble origins in student hostels, government buildings, and a few select private homes, Chandigarh's modernist furniture has taken the world by storm, appearing almost everywhere from the New York Times and Wall Street Journal to upscale department stores in France, Chinese restaurants in London, health and cosmetic clinics, t-shirts for furniture fans, and of course the home of Kim Kardashian and Kanye West. In our conference paper, which we hope you'll have a chance to read, we suggest that the furniture's astronomical rise in popularity and price has not been due to chance or luck, nor has it been rooted specifically in the design merits of these objects themselves. Rather, we suggest that the popularity and the widespread collective understanding of the history of these pieces, their design, designers, uses, and rightful location are the product of a systematic process of object promotion and resale. These processes are noteworthy not only in and of themselves, but also because, as scholars working in parallel fields such as criminology, art history, and archaeology have noted, markets and market actors are driven to change stories and understandings of objects in order to increase general interest and raise financial values. For example, in our paper, we highlight how dealers and auction houses exclusively attribute the design of Chandigarh's modernist furniture to the white European Pierre Jeanneret. Their refusal to explore or acknowledge the many Indian craftsmen, designers, and architects involved in the furniture's creation has all but erased India and Indian people from the object's history. We also show in our paper how such narratives inflate collectors' egos. The assertions that Chandigarh residents did not appreciate and in fact mistreated the city's furniture serve to perpetuate neo-colonial white savior narratives, which allow buyers and sellers to paint themselves as the good guys in this story. The paper also illustrates how market actors and sales strategies have, for lack of a better term, de-objectified Chandigarh's modernist furniture, treating these functional chairs, tables, bookcases, etc. as works of fine art to be looked at but not sat in, or simply as financial instruments to generate returns. Market manipulation of object histories and knowledges should be of particular note to scholars and academics of design because, as a whole host of academics and experts working in criminological archaeology, that's a mouthful, and art history, such as archaeologist Neil Brody, criminological archaeologist Donna Yates, criminologists Simon Mackenzie and Emmeline Smith have repeatedly emphasized, markets and market actors rely on the work of academics and museum professionals to continue and indeed to legitimize their stories, actions, objects, and financial values. We therefore want to spend the rest of this talk encouraging those in the room to think hard, long, and critically about what you are writing about objects of design, about how we write these stories, what we emphasize, and who we're willing to work with in order to do so. This applies both to those of us working on famous, expensive objects as it does to those of us working on more pedestrian design. Because, as the case of Chandigarh's furniture highlights so poignantly and powerfully, the latter can quickly, and perhaps surprisingly, be transformed into the former. Your work, in fact, may have already been used to warrant unaffordable sky-high prices, to facilitate the removal of an object from a source location to a destination country, or to legitimize a fraudulent object. Completely avoiding the cozy cabal of academics, dealers, and collectors, as described by archaeologists and cultural historians Christopher Prescott and Josephine Munch Rasmussen, is, of course, a complicated and difficult endeavor. However, scholars coming before us from a variety of disciplines have laid out a few key steps which design scholars and historians can adapt, adopt, emulate, and follow. First among these steps is to privilege stories of use. As the Chandigarh case study illustrates, markets build value and prestige by connecting objects to already popular and prominent narratives, individuals, and locations within the canon of design. A chair designed by Le Corbusier or Le Corbusier's cousin, Pierre Jeanneret, is therefore sexy and desirable. A chair sat in for years by a mid-level Indian bureaucrat or by decades of students at the Punjab University, according to the market, not so valuable. As scholars, we can begin to combat this by emphasizing and privileging stories of use within our scholarship, focusing not on the designer who may have created a piece, but on the frequently many ways, locations, and individuals associated with use. Perhaps most conceptually, we would urge design scholars to lean into the complicated and messy natures of designed objects, refusing to engage in the simplistic, frequently colonial, patriarchal, racist, and sexist generalizations of design history favored by market actors. As historian Priya Satya argues so clearly in Time's Monster, there is immense liberatory and transformative potential in a rejection of history based on a linear flow of time. Writing exclusively linear narratives, according to Satya, cramps the space for ethical maneuver and fundamentally ties the historian, the practice of history, and possible futures to Eurocentric great man models of history. Instead, as Dipesh Chakrabarty reminds us in Provincializing Europe, the writing of history must implicitly assume the plurality of times existing together, a disjuncture of the present with itself. We therefore encourage design historians to embrace complicated and shared attributions, to acknowledge collaborative studio production, manifold, frequently inter- and transnational influences, messy transnational identities, shifting and unclear dates and nonlinear timelines, to be comfortable with and explicitly identifying the many unknowns of the objects and practices we study, and the perhaps frequent impossibility of surety in the writing of history. Markets rely on confidence and trust to build financial value. Therefore, by embracing and perhaps even celebrating uncertainty, design history can undercut destructive market narratives and stories. Third among these points is to refuse to value or authenticate objects. Ethically, morally, and legally gray markets rely on expert authentication and valuation of objects being sold to assuage potential fears of buyers and establish financial value. As scholars, it's our role to learn about objects, their histories, their uses, their meanings, and their futures. It is not, nor it should be, our job to support market functions. Authentication and valuation should be seen as fulfilling such market needs rather than scholarly ones. As Neil Brody has repeatedly emphasized, our opinions and actions carry the weight of authority, and as a result exert disproportionately large commercial effects. As Brody has further stressed, markets need mechanism of value assignment and price formation. So by refusing to serve this role, academics can begin to undercut and cut off the influence and operation of markets. Scholars of design and other disciplines as well continue to engage with and work for private collections, collectors, dealers, and gallerists. Under the guise of the pursuit of knowledge or preservation of individual objects, academics and curators continue to provide advice to collectors and dealers, receiving in exchange access to objects, to research materials, and an in to circles of prominent individuals who come with their own collections and connections in turn. By continuing to work with private collections, academics are both sanctioning private trade, market manipulation of narrative, and movement of objects from the public to the private sphere. We, alongside criminological experts, strongly suggest that you do not do this. If an object or collection is important enough to be studied, it is important enough to be put in a public collection, accessible to all interested individuals, scholars, and citizens alike. Finally, academics, design scholars, and designers can push back against false and harmful effects of market manipulation by critically engaging with these forces and impacts in their work. We encourage all those studying design to look closely and carefully at how markets and economic forces may have or might change the public, but also the professional understanding of your objects of study. These 5 things, of course, are no magic bullet in transforming the practice of design history. But as developments in other parallel fields like art history and archaeology have illustrated, they're nevertheless important first steps towards the realignment of our field away from its elite, colonial, and connoisseurial roots and towards a more liberatory, transformative practice. Thank you so much for listening. We, as always, look forward to questions and conversation and are always reachable at our email address or through our website, which you can find on the screen.